Did you really?
Wait,
Yeah.
really?
After all that shit?
Yeah, the bots took it over, and all it said was
Oh.
the bots picked up that it was a copyright violation, and they said you don't take it down, but they have the right to monetize your video, which I'm sure they were horribly disappointed in when they realized that 600 people watched it instead of 6 million.
Ooh, oh, are we live? I just gotta remember how to do this. Hold on, I'm getting there. Getting in.
Pop out the Chizat. We'll put it right.
I'm getting in here.
There.
Come on. Come on, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna get there.
Bum, 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 bum,
I
bum.
remember how you told me to do this. Every once in a while I get in there. That's 3 months ago. That's not current.
Hello, everybody. Montana, Brian, Hannah.
Yeah.
What computer's on? Is this mine? It was. Sorry.
Yep. Close that down.
The old pop out.
Hello, everybody. Sailing on choppy waters today. Yeah, hopefully it's not choppy for you guys, Valeria. We're crossing our fingers at this hold up. Right now it's clear outside. But right before we recorded the storm, a wave of the storm came through and the internet cut out completely. So we'll see how that goes.
What?
Sorry.
What? Just having fun. Having fun.
Having fun.
Yay.
Great.
What's up, everybody? Talk amongst yourselves while I handle something real quickly.
What is happening? What is here?
Business. I got to do some business.
Right.
The man's doing some business.
Doing business.
Right.
Come on in, everybody. Come on.
I better
in.
skim through and see who's here. Hey,
Boring
everybody.
gray British weather here.
Hey, you guys.
Hello, hello, hello. I hope everyone,
Right.
Sailing on choppy waters. I know, so
Yeah,
many
I put out a
storms.
post telling people that this may not work.
So many storms, yeah. But I feel good about it.
Sorry, everybody.
Do you have any idea what you're doing over there?
I don't. I mean, I know what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
I
That's
don't know
good.
if I'm gonna be
That's
able
something.
to do it. It was a thing you just texted me about.
Yeah.
I was checking that.
It's cool. I like to just be by myself over here.
Like,
Just watch you guys text each other and I'll just
it's
sit over here.
top secret.
I know.
Top secret.
It's cool. I always get left out. It's not a big deal.
I want to know who in the chat has been in like the path of some of these storms and various tornadoes and stuff. Usually California is the one that's just getting beaten to hell. So
You guys have had a bunch of bad weather.
and just in general other things. So while I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. It feels like different to not be the one who people are like going like, how are you doing over there? Danielle says tornado watches over here, but nothing too severe yet. That's good.
Danielle.
Yeah.
lives
What
close
does,
to
did you
us.
say, did you
Not
answer
really
what your
close to us,
shirt
a couple
says?
hours. I just showed him.
Oh, you did good.
What's it say?
I missed it.
It says I created monsters and they call me dad.
That's great.
It's the truth. Very much so.
Yeah.
My youngest,
sure many people can relate
since
to
we're
that.
bragging kid sports for a second, my youngest is playing, he plays at a very high level soccer. Plays like on a travel soccer team that's a very high level team. And we put him in the rec league just so he could play with his friends, but we moved him up because we didn't think that was fair to everybody. And the coach didn't know him. And he's like, are you sure he should be up? And I'm like, just give it a practice and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And by the end of the practice, he's like, oh, he's our best player. I'm
Your
like,
starting center.
I know. I know he is.
Yeah, we were just talking in the Patreon section that my daughter got pitched a perfect game, her first perfect game, and
pretty awesome.
her softball game, her varsity softball game yesterday.
Pretty awesome.
Yep. Little Rock area here. It's just versus Friday. Half hour before neighborhood was destroyed. Oh yeah, Little Rock got that nasty tornadoes.
Erica had one come within a few miles of the house, so lots of damage in leveled buildings.
Jennifer's asking about my handsome cousin when he's gonna be on the show.
Who, Max?
Miles. I'm sure she's talking about Miles, not Max.
Oh, Miles, one we were talking about.
Yeah.
He is gorgeous.
Did you see he just won a He was a coach for Niles, and they just won a district title.
I did
First
not
time
did not see
in
that.
20 years or some shit.
Sweet.
He won. The last time they won is when he was a player there.
No shit.
Yeah.
And he's gorgeous.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to see a picture. Gonna
He's a
have
very
to see a
handsome,
picture.
handsome man.
Yeah, I don't know how he's related to Zach. And
Well, I was gonna
well,
say good
well,
looking
for a couple of
family, but that's
reasons.
cool. No, that's fine. Go ahead and
For a couple of reasons. One, because he was so good looking. The other two is because he's also a black man. So I don't know. That's when Zach, like, this is my cousin. It's like, wait, I forget that you come from a biracial family sometimes. I'm like, how is he? Wait, what? You guys don't look anything alike.
Like I talk about it a lot, but
Even his profile picture there.
I know,
The
I'm
man
trying
is
to see.
gorgeous.
He's a handsome gentleman.
One of the prettiest men I've ever seen.
Handsome gentleman. Yeah,
nice.
with his nice big old smile. His nice big old. I don't know how well it will come through, but he's a
Yeah,
handsome
gorgeous.
gentleman.
But you can see
Simple
my
as that.
surprise when Zach introduced me to him as his cousin.
Only in that I agree that Zach talks about it all the time, and you don't have an excuse for forgetting that he comes from a biracial family.
Right.
If all of that weren't true, sure,
Right,
I would
yeah.
say I could understand.
My defense, I'm very rarely paying attention to what other people are saying.
True.
We know.
True.
We know. What'd you say?
Jennifer said, okay, and you haven't answered my question about his coming on the show.
I don't know.
We'll have to start a basketball podcast to get him.
Basketball.
There we go.
Yep. We should
Tally that one up there with the rest of the podcast.
Show
Made
them
Us and Bob and Weave. And
Yeah, all the other
Louisville,
Off Duty.
sure.
and now True Crime Binge.
True Crime Binge.
They come and they go. As far as the stream, as of right now, so I have for those of you that weren't on Facebook, I have Starlink internet, which works fantastic, except for when it started raining so hard earlier that I couldn't see 5 feet out my window, and then it just stopped working completely. And we're supposed to have, they're saying 40 to 60 mile an hour winds, 2-inch hail, possible tornadoes, and a shit ton of rain. But as I was just out there, as of right now, everything looks real calm.
Great.
So we should probably not.
You know what? Let's not
much
dawdle.
longer.
We should get
Yeah.
we'll get her going today just in case. Sounds good.
I got things to say, by the way. So don't fucking leave me alone.
Huh?
Over here by myself.
When do you have things to say?
I think I have things to say all the time.
Okay.
Just letting you know.
Put your hand up when you're. All right. Ready? Yeah, your tiny hand. Maybe I can have the big hand today. Let's go. Real quick, Brittany, I hope so. I have quail in an incubator, which was one of my concerns for today of the power outage.
Had that not been about quail, he'd have kept going. But because it was quail, he had to stop. And
That was a
then finish it.
solid question.
We're always looking out for those quail.
Here we go. Alrighty, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm just going to give everybody, this will be in the audio version, but just a heads up, if there's anything quirky that happens in today's recording, we're recording on Wednesday, and there's supposed to be a massive storm moving through our area over the next hour while we're trying to record this. And we're on Zoom, and I have satellite internet. So things may get a little funky here, but hopefully so far so good. Real quick, so a housekeeping thing. I've never ever done this before, and I hesitate doing it, but I do want to. Let me back up just a little bit here, just to give you guys a very transparent view of what's going on. Anybody that's in our Patreon group or anything is known for a while. I've been concerned about the podcasting industry. And as it compares to the economy, this industry has never existed during a recession or any downturn in economic times. And I fancy myself a bit of an economist. So for the last year, I've been worried that, the way we operate is we operate off of ad revenue. That's why the show's free to you. It'll always be free to you guys. And we get paid by advertisers, but the first thing to go in a recession is marketing budgets. And this is not a truth and justice issue or even a Wondery issue. This is an industry-wide issue. I've talked to several friends in the space. But while our download numbers and our listenership is fantastic and growing, the ad revenue is plummeting drastically. And that's for those of you that listen to True Crime Binge, you know that we had to pull a plug on True Crime Binge, at least for the time being, until things straighten out, because it just that it's just gone to where it was costing us money to operate that show. And this is and always will be mine and Zach and Janet's focus, is the work that we do here on Truth and Justice. But we did, it's not looking good. We got our quarterly revenue report for what we're looking at for the coming month, and we're for the coming quarter, and it's not good, and we're going to have to start making some pretty serious cuts to keep the show operational. So I want to preface this by saying that regardless of what happens, this show will always continue. The work that we do here is the most important thing in my professional lives, and I know that Zach and Janet feel the same way. We all have lives and careers, but we're here because we feel very strongly about the work we're doing. So there's no concern about that. We'll continue doing the work we're going to do. But with that being said, in order to keep the ship afloat and try to limit the amount of cutbacks and stuff that we're going to have to do to keep the show rolling, I'm just going to make a brief request. This is the only time I'm going to do it. So yeah, and don't feel bad if you can't do this, but anybody that has ever thought about joining our Patreon, now would be an amazing time for you to do that. We have the $5 level of Patreon. If you were to do that, you'll get your own feed that you can plug into all your podcast players, and you get every episode, bonuses, everything ad free. So that's just one advantage. Plus, when you're in the Patreon community, there's it's a whole nother social media platform for discussions and chatting and stuff going on. And then also we do, you get the follow-ups. Not only do you get the follow-ups on video, but you also get, we do an hour-long pre-show, Zach and Janet and I, on video before the show starts every week. That's not show related. It's just kind of a fun conversation where we just kind of talk about what's going on in our lives.
I was 100% going to say that. You call it a pre-show, but it's a whole different show.
It really is. Yeah. It would be in a different time. It could be its own podcast, but we just do it. So every week, if you want to, on Patreon, you can plug in and watch an hour of us just kind of shooting the shit, and then get a video version of the podcast. And again, you get the ad-free versions of it. But that's all I want to tell you guys. I've always been extremely transparent. I will put a link. Sorry, somebody in the chat just asked, the YouTube chat asked if we can put a link to the Patreon. Yes, we will do. I will do that here. I'll put it in the chat. But it's patreon.com/truthandjustice is where you go to join the Patreon. So anyway, as I'm sure anybody that knows me know, that's a difficult thing for us to talk about, but you can blame Janet. Janet convinced me that it was okay to ask you guys to help support us to keep things going along.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just jump in for a second, I would say too that you are so great about asking your listeners to show up for costs that pertain to DNA testing and legal fees and things for the people that you focused on through the seasons when they need help. And you've always been so appreciative and so vocal about how much the Truth and Justice Army shows up for those costs. And so I would just gently say, and again, Zach and I aren't taking money for this. We understand that this is Bob's world. This is Bob's job. He committed his entire career to making these changes happen, and we're here to show up for it because we love it. I continue to be a patron of the show, even as I come in and co-host with Zach. And so if you have been one of those people that has showed up and been able to do that for these different financial causes, this isn't really very different, because in order to be able to help pay for DNA testing down the line, this podcast needs to exist. And I know Bob says he's going to do it no matter what, but there are a lot of different ways that he will make that happen. And I would like to see it happen in a way that is good, healthy for his soul, healthy for his family. And just know that you're showing up for, this is not, there's no like other side of Bob that you don't see off the show where you would be, you wouldn't want to support him. He is this person all the way down, all the way through. This is his heart. And so this is the time to show him how much you appreciate what he's doing and just show up for him. You know what I mean? Because you know that like if things clear up, he's gonna be like, guys, we're doing okay. Like if for those of you who are having trouble making those Patreon patrons, why don't you unsubscribe? Like he's just very open and transparent about all that stuff. So know that if he's asking, it's because we need you and we love you and we appreciate you. And we know that you will come to the table in the best way you can. Anyway, let's move on.
All right. Thank you for that, Janet. And I already saw people in the chat that say they're joining, and it really does. It means many hands make light work. This is why we always keep our Patreon subscriptions down low. So if a bunch of people do it, and with that being said, let's move on to Truth and Justice stuff, podcast stuff.
Do you want to touch this first?
Yeah. Zach just wrote down a note here, and several listeners reminded me, and thank you for the reminder. Last week when we heard Daniela's interview, where she the officers interviewing her mentioned, well, Brandon told us something about a miscarriage. We looked back through Brandon Kugler Harrison's interview from 2007, and there was no mention of it. Somebody in the chat had figured out that there was another interview. Literally, I found out the day before Daniela was interviewed that we hadn't heard about yet. And that day I went looking for it and couldn't find it. Then I was reminded on the chat, and I did end up I have not been able to find a transcript for it, but I did find the audio for that interview. And so I will be posting that as a bonus, but Zach and I listened to it. It's only 20 minutes long. We listened to it right before we came in here. Do you have any thoughts on it, Zach?
I mean, he does address the idea of the miscarriage, which is I realistically think it's like the first time we hear anybody actually talk about it that's not a detective.
Well, Javier, remember Javier said that she had told him.
Okay, she does.
Yeah.
He does. Javier does mention it, but Brandon seems to remember it being early in 2006 is when it's happening. So we're predating the murders by 8-9 months.
Right. Yeah, and essentially he says the same thing that Javier says, but I will point out that it to me it gives some credence. Not that I never thought Javier was lying about it, but I wondered if it was a story that Becky was maybe kind of making up, because we hadn't heard about it from anybody else, and that still could be the case. But what Brandon says is the interview, he says that Vargas is interviewing him, and he says, "Did she ever say anything about a pregnancy or anything like that?" And Brandon said, "I think I remember her mentioning that she thought she had a miscarriage at some point." Which best he could recall, he dated back to probably the spring of 2006. Like he originally said,
he thought he said before he moved or before she moved back, but then you said he corrected himself.
Yeah, and I think he said it would have been like between February and April 2006, which is about when Javier said, I think, that she had told him. But remember, what Javier had told police is that she told him that when she was with Robert back then, that she had gotten pregnant and had a miscarriage, but she never told Robert about the pregnancy or the miscarriage.
And Brandon does say that he believes she was with Robert at that time.
Yeah. Nothing about whether or not she told him. He just said he didn't know. I mean, seems like a very honest guy doing his best with things, as far as trying to help the police out. But it is consistent with what Javier had said. Also, when Daniela was told that Brandon mentioned a miscarriage, that's true. He was in the interview. I think he was interviewed on the 12th of September in 2013, and Daniela was the next day. So, but I'll put that whole interview up as a bonus coming up. This episode this week is going to be a weird kind of double thing. I'll talk about it at the end of the show, but I'm actually putting it out in 2 parts, but I don't want you guys to wait a week between parts. So I'm literally going to put out an episode on Monday and another one on Tuesday with the 2 parts, just because for our contractual stuff, I can't put out 3-hour-long episodes. So I got to break them up.
Nice.
Okay.
So that'll be coming. And we'll talk about what that is here in just a little bit. And if you don't have any more thoughts on Brandon, Janet, or do you?
No, just a quick shout out to Nicole, who made sure to post that on the follow-up Facebook posting so that we would remember to do that too, because I really appreciated that. Because I
also
completely
Pamela.
forgotten.
Yeah, Pamela had made another post about it too. I saw both of those.
Thanks, Pamela.
So
that's great.
thank you guys for that.
Super helpful.
So this week's episode, the Glock, I'll wait and see what the questions are. but
Sure.
don't let me end this episode without, if we don't get to some of these points that I've done more digging into. I think there was a holster. I don't know if anybody asked about it, but okay, good. So we'll talk about all that stuff. So make sure that I get to that. Did you guys have any thoughts on the Chad Birnbaum and the Glock?
Well, I think Chad's interviews were very telling. I mean, obviously they're very separated, but in his first interview, I mean, he's very poignant that he thinks Robert owned a shotgun, and that's really all he knows. And then there's, I mean, he even the detective even prods a little bit, and he there's not much else there.
Yeah,
he says, oh, they have some knives and whatever, but they don't.
Well, he very clearly says if he had anything, it was just a shotgun.
Okay.
Yeah, in 2007 is what he said. And
then in the later interview, he brings it up. They come back and he starts talking about firearms, but he even brings up the picture, which is again dated. We're presuming 2010-ish. I mean, I'm sure there's some data on that photo that we could pull out somehow, but from his Facebook post is 2010-ish. So I mean, we know that it's not pre-murder at this point. And I think it's hard. I mean, we talk about, I mean, the episode's named The Glock. I'm the firearm guy, right? Like this is what I do. I'm super excited about this episode as soon as it came out. And it's really hard to say. I mean, if Robert had access to a Glock, as it's called, I mean, that's the brand of firearm. They're everywhere. That's one of the most popular firearm brands in the United States. It very well could be that he had access to it. Just because he doesn't own one at that time, there very well could be access to it, but it also doesn't mean that there's not thousands of other people that have access to a Glock firearm, because it is one of the most popular brands in the United States. And it's very hard for me to continue to see these guys painted as gun nuts because they own guns they are target shooters. That's what I am. I mean, that's what I've done. And it's very frustrating to continually see them be painted as these crazies because they own guns and they like to shoot. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, we do that all the time. The same thing with fires. They talk about them being, they're obsessed with fire. Well, like, trust me, we were good old boys in high school that liked bonfires just as much as the next guy. I don't think we were obsessed with fire. So there's a lot there to unpack, I think.
Yeah, there is it. Sorry, go ahead, Janet.
Oh, no, I've said this before, but I'm just very grateful that we have your perspective, Zach, on the show for any number of reasons, not just because of your expertise, but because I do think that there are a lot of listeners like me who just didn't grow up around guns. It's not a judgment call. I literally just didn't grow up around them, except for a few family friends who had ranches and stuff. And I think for those of us who listen to the show who may not have had that experience, you can sort of, I think, get sucked into the narrative that the state was putting out there of like, well, people who are interested in guns love violence, or, how can you ever forget that they were made to kill and that's what they're supposed to do? And so if you're thinking about guns all the time, you probably want to kill everybody. And this is a very sensitive time in the world, in our country, to be talking about guns and gun access. And so all of those things are sort of floating around this case, whether or not they really have truly anything directly to do with it. And so I just so appreciate, and I'm so glad that you, one of the gentlest, most wonderful, dear-hearted, sensitive people I know, also has the experience of like being great with guns and loving target shooting and all of that, because it really, for anybody who loves this show who doesn't know what to make of Robert and Christian, I just think it's really helpful to think to yourself like, well, how about imagine Zach? Like, I couldn't be less concerned about Jack.
And there are everybody comes from different walks of life, and I think it's important to understand. So like Zach and I, for example, both of us have several guns. We have them for very different for the most part, have them for different reasons and different types of guns. And like I said, anyone could see either one of us as a gun nut. Zach was a competitive, I mean, you haven't done it in a while, but still is a professional competitive shooter. So he's got a lot of ARs and handguns and things like that they use, and certain types of shotguns that they use for that type of thing, where I have guns because I'm a hunter. So what I have are bolt action long range rifles that are not semi-automatic. And then there are people that just have never messed with guns, have never been around guns, don't like guns, and all of that's fine. I'm not saying there's all those different perspectives are fine.
And as a crafter, I own a hot glue gun.
Right.
Pause for withering judgment.
But just know that, just like when I saw later and we're going to get into this stuff later, but not what Robert had access to in 2006, but like later on, like when they were arrested, and they go through like the collection of guns that he's amassed since then, and he has several different ARs, and like, to me, there was nothing concerning about that, because I know, so there's one sitting right next to me that has a similar collection that does that type of thing. So, but anyway, we should move on from that
For sure. But I'm glad just we put that out there, because I think it's still coming up for people as we
and
talk
I'm
about.
I'm just gonna
the episode's called The Glock.
I'm going to interject one thing really quick, and I think, Bob, you're on the same page as me. Even though like I couldn't legally own a gun, I believe I probably had my first shotgun at 12 or 13 years old.
Me too.
That my dad purchased me. Now, it wasn't legally in my name, but it was considered mine. I was supposed to take care of it. It's still I have it in my possession now. So I don't think it's super unusual to own a shotgun younger than that for hunting purposes and whatever it mails me.
I don't either. And I just want to do a real quick shout out in the YouTube chat to What About Bob, who points out that he indeed owns a caulk gun. And then we can move on to the first question.
Oh, good. What about Bob? I also own a caulk gun. Thank you. You made me feel even craftier. Great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the registration. A lot of this stuff connects to everything else because of the content of the episode. But Brian B., Veronica C. also had some similar thoughts. I'm going to read Brian's post. I don't own any guns, but if you purchase one legally, don't you have to register it as an owner? If that's the case, shouldn't there be records of Robert's father owning a Glock? Because we heard in the episode that Chad thought maybe that's what was going on. Are we assuming if Robert did have one when the murders took place, he had it illegally? Couldn't RNC defense team use the testimony from Chad when he said Robert didn't own a Glock against the new one years later when he changed his story? So a few different things going around in there.
Yeah, to the end point there, if you go through the transcript, you'll see the defense did a pretty good job of trying to impeach him from his older story. But so what's happening is the defense is going, look, you were interviewed in 2007 and you said the only thing that he had was a shotgun. And then in 2000, when was it, 16? Now you're saying you think you're sure you remember him having a Glock back then. And a lot of times you have Chad on the stand like saying, yeah, I would have remembered better back then. But then the prosecution comes back and is like, yeah, but you know more about guns now, and certain things trigger your memory. You were traumatized back then. So there was a lot of that back and forth stuff. As far as legally owning the gun, I can tell you Robert did not own a Glock back then. And I've been spending a lot of time this week researching it, and I don't think there's any chance that he had access to a handgun back then. If you go on our website and look at the Charlie's Angels picture, you'll see the gun they're talking about was a photo taken in 2010. It's a grainy photo. It's Chad that's holding it. Robert is holding an AR that he does own, is his, and Sam is holding a shotgun on the other side, and then Chad standing in the middle, and all you can see is just a handle of a black gun, a blurry handle from long ways away of this black gun that he's holding. And if you listen to what he's saying, he really doesn't even remember whose it was. It may have been Robert's, but again, that was in 2010. And you're going to get more about Robert's owning guns and stuff in this week's episode. But as far as registering the guns, that's one of the things that's most frustrating to me. Yes, when you buy a gun, it gets registered. Now you can trade in long guns, like a shotgun. Like I could sell Zach a shotgun with no paperwork if I wanted to. Long guns. Handguns are different. And these are federal laws. With a handgun, even if I'm selling him or giving him my used gun, you have to file paperwork on the transfer of that gun for it to be registered. Like the only way Robert could have access to one when he was working part-time at a water park is if he were to buy it on the black market somewhere, and no one has ever seen him with it or heard of him having it. But what's frustrating is when you register those guns, that information is very well protected by the ATF because they don't want to infringe on people's rights. Like they don't want people to be able to look up, well, what guns do people own? Because especially, go back to Second Amendment stuff. And I know this is a hot topic right now with everything we have going on. So I'm not giving a political position on this at all, but the information is protected. The only people that can get access to that information is law enforcement. And it's not hard. We hear in a couple of interviews, the officers doing the interviewing mentioning you have this registered to you, you have this registered to you. which sounds to me that they did pull the registrations. I've personally seen it done. A friend of mine had completed a suicide a while back, and he had a lot of guns, and I was helping his wife, who was trying to find them all, because he had some things going on at the time, and there was some paranoia involved, and he was hiding stuff. And so I went to the police chief and was like, can we find out how many guns he has so we know if we found them all? And he was able to, I don't know how quick it was, but I know I talked to him one day, and I went into his office the next day, and he had the list from the ATF of every gun that he had. Not difficult at all for them to have that information. I suspect they probably had, from little context clues during those interviews, it sounds to me like they did have that information. The problem is, if they don't admit they have it and it's not in discovery, the defense has no way of getting that. There's no subpoena, nothing. There's no way to get a gun registry unless you are with law enforcement.
Okay. So, yeah, and I guess you can't get something if it doesn't exist. Because
Right.
that was a question. I mean, Mark on Facebook had pointed out, yes, legally they have to be 21 and register if they follow the law. Mark says that can be a big if, but you've just sort of established why it's not necessarily super easy or common to be a person who has an illegal firearm that no one has seen or heard about.
Yeah, and they had Robert's bank records, and he worked part-time. Like, he didn't have the kind of money it would take to go buy a black market gun from someone, or the connections.
Right. Kate says, reading through transcripts, the defense did an adequate job of trying to point out the difference of Chad's interview stories about the gun. One thing I did notice is they missed the opportunity to point out Jeremy Witt's character defect that Chad knew. To be clear, no guns were registered to Robert or Christian in 2006, nor was there any gun found in the searches of their property, correct? Was there ever an investigator or whoever executed the search warrants on their places that testified about what they found? And Kate mentioned an Officer Ford as potentially perhaps there being some sort of transcript or interview or testimony.
I'll check for Officer Ford's transcript. I'm not sure about that. Do either of you understand what she was getting at with the Jeremy Witt character flaw? Did I miss
No, I
something?
actually don't. I actually am not sure. But Kate, if you're here, which I think you might be,
Maybe clear that up in the chat.
yeah,
Kate,
if you
'cause I
want
don't know what
to
you mean by that.
elaborate on that a little bit, because I didn't immediately remember which thing Chad could point out about Jeremy.
Yeah.
So yeah, weigh in on that, and then we'll come back to that.
Yeah, but as far as the rest of it goes, so the crimes occurred September 2006. Robert and Christian's houses the search warrants were served, and they searched their houses on October 2nd of 2007. So a little over a year later. And there was a search of Robert's house, his grandma's house, Christian's mom's house. I don't know if they did his dad's house, but Christian was living at the time with Jackie and Lois, and they searched their house. At that time, Christian had an old side-by-side double barrel shotgun and a pump action shotgun. And I haven't finished sussing all that out to see when he got that, but I believe he got that after the fact. Robert had two guns in 2007. When they searched his house, they found a 12 gauge pump action shotgun, and they found a bolt action 7.62 millimeter rifle that was like a Russian, like World War II era rifle. Robert had bought that rifle, and you'll hear it on Sunday. Again, another indication that sounds like they had pulled the registration. They talk about that he bought it from Big Five. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a California store or whatever it is.
Big Five Sporting Goods, yeah.
Yeah, he had bought it from Big Five. It was registered. He did it. It was an inexpensive gun, and then the shotgun he had got from his uncle, who had passed away, and he says that he got that like 2 months before.
Was it a Mosin Nagant?
Yeah.
That's a very, oh, Josh just put it up there too, but Mosin Nagants are very cheap firearms, and you see a lot of people own them because they're so easily to get a hold of and they're so affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Except for they are extremely strange round, and they're not worth a damn to shoot.
Yeah, yeah, it's an old, and keep in mind there was none of the victims were shot with that type of round. It's a rifle, not a shotgun or a handgun. But he did not own a handgun. They did not find a handgun in either place, and they did not find anywhere where they had access to a handgun at that point. And again, there'll be more on that later. And also, they didn't find, they found a bunch of 7.62 rounds, which are the ones that go in that Mosin Nagant.
And I'll stop for a second. You're saying 7.62, which is the correct. It's 7.62 by 5.4, which is different than an AK round, which is 7.62 by 3.9.
Okay.
And people will, if you're saying 7.62, people are going to immediately attach it to an AK, which is considered an assault rifle, which is a different thing. Mosin Nagant shoots a 7.62 by 5.4, which is a very large round. It's a very different round.
Yeah, and it's a bolt actor, so there's a type of gun. He had no scope on it or anything. Type of, they would be like, well, imagine World War II. That's what they were used in. So I hope that answers those questions.
Yeah, and Sarah had a question about kind of whether or not the defense had tried their best to use Chad's prior statements to show the differences between things that he had said then and things that he said later. So Kate kind of answered Sarah's question. It was like listener answering listener's question there. So shout out to Sarah. I wanted to read this from Rachel. I thought this was really interesting. Rachel says, Bodmer seems to have a very specific MO when interviewing potential witnesses. He presents them with a bunch of hypothetical sounding scenarios like, could the guns have been purchased in 2006? And when the witness says they don't know, he tells them it's okay not to remember, but is it possible? And a reasonable witness says, I mean, yeah, I guess it's possible. And then he takes it as fact. I'm just floored that a jury convicted them on this basis.
Yeah,
I guess it's not.
It's not. It wasn't really a question.
And I will say there are a couple of things in here that are statements, not questions. And both listeners preface this by saying, like, I recognize that this isn't a question, but it's just something that they wanted to put out there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's very, I remember when we first started hearing from Bodmer, I said, I'm so refreshed because I feel like in my own head this has haunted me. But I was like, I'm so refreshed by Bodmer's approach because it's so different from Leclerc's. He's so personable. He's so appreciative of everyone that he's talking to. He's very polite. And all of that sort of goes to also the sort of looseness of like recognizing that people aren't necessarily going to remember. And from on the surface, like everything he's doing to me seems like what I would imagine a good investigator doing, like saying, like, I understand that you're not going to remember all of this. Don't worry. That's not a bad thing. Or, we're not coming after you. We just want to talk to you and hear what you have to say, but we only want to hear the truth. We don't want to hear anything. We don't want you to manufacture memories, anything like that. I feel like all of that stuff seems like good, healthy investigation. And so it's been a really interesting process for me, and I think for many of us, to sort of parse that out a little bit more and understand what might be a little bit more dangerous than what meets the eye about the way some of this stuff takes its shape,
Bodmer's interviewing techniques to me it's very clear to me that he is a DA investigator and that he is at this point trying to get evidence for trial. Again, he's not in a phase where he's trying to figure out what happened. He's trying to get evidence at trial. And you hear that with Chad, with him, Chad first tells him, nope, I don't think we even went shooting until after the murders. And now he just had a shotgun, and he just pushes and prods and pushes and prods. And then like, I don't want you to make anything up. And then make a suggestion and push and because he's trying to get something that can be used. I also do want to point out, Nicole in the YouTube chat mentioned that Christian's dad owned a list of guns, and of course they were driving his dad's car. I've seen, I don't quote me on this until next week when I can verify this, but I believe Christian's dad owned a shotgun, but I don't believe that he owned a handgun. And Nicole, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. But I haven't seen anywhere where they would have access to a handgun so far.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely had some questions about that I'll shout out as we move past them, since that just came up now. I want to, well, this is very much in keeping with what we were just saying and what you just mentioned. Sarah said, the interviewer said, the truth never changes. That's something that stuck out to some people in one of the statements that Bodmer makes. The truth never changes. The truth always comes out. And then when it does, the truth never changes. And Sarah was just pointing out the irony of, other people's stories changing as they needed to be changed over the years to make something fit better. Trisha said, yeah, he said the truth never changes, yet Chad's truth changed even within that series of interviews.
Right.
And they went ahead and ran with it. So just a lot of
To me,
people
it really
noticing the
felt
irony.
like veiled, and it's just my feeling on it. But it really felt like veiled threats, not the right word, but intimidation by he tells him everything he knows. It's not helpful at all. And, just, I need you to tell the truth. This is on the record. This is all recorded, and the truth doesn't change. And it like that
with Lois,
segment,
kind of the sort of
yeah,
like,
yeah. And that
people...
segment to me felt very much like you better tell me the truth. What you're telling me isn't it's giving a message that what you're telling me isn't what I'm looking for, and I'm not happy about it, is the way it felt to me.
Which is interesting because Chad seemed so incredibly cooperative about all of that.
And that's something that, you're taught as an interrogator or interviewer to try to capitalize. If you're catching on, they're trying to be cooperative. There's a lot of subtle things that are happening in people's brains when they're, what we would call suggestible, where somebody's like, okay, they're trying to be cooperative. And then you start kind of giving them, I know you're trying to help me. I'm trying to let you know without saying it that you're not helping me. And by the way, let me make a few more little suggestions that are maybe things that would help me, without saying it. That's just the way I took it, just from my experience and training and interviewing and interrogation techniques. Like that's what I was hearing through that was, I'm letting you know that you didn't help. I know you want to help, and giving you a little idea without saying so what I need you to say that would be helpful.
And I guess Leclerc's version of that was just to say, most people who kill people don't kill someone before they kill someone, or that whole line of inquiry was like,
a little preview of my favorite Leclercism ever, and what you're going to hear coming up, where he definitely demonstrates that he's not the sharpest one in the room, when he says, it's in an interview with Robert, and he tells him he wants to take a polygraph, and Robert's like, well, okay, well, I got to talk to a lawyer or whatever and see, what, because they're not really accurate, are they? And Leclerc goes, oh, they're accurate. They're science. They're just not admissible in court. And Robert says, well, if they're so accurate, why aren't they admissible in court? To a long pause. And but anyway, you'll hear that. But there's some weird gotchas. Like, well, Christian's dad said he did have a home phone. So it's like, what are you talking about?
So Kate mentioned earlier about Jeremy's mental defect, or whatever we want to call it. She posted in here that Chad said he had PTSD or some other mental issues in his 2016 interview.
Oh, okay. So that's the thing she was. Kate
so that's what we were
about.
addressing. Yeah,
okay.
That's what Kate was addressing.
Oh, thanks, Kate.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so Tracy, this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit before, but Tracy said, didn't Chad say that he and Robert had gone out with Sam and his dad? Was that part of their process? Did they check to see if it could have been Sam's dad's gun?
It should have been.
It
should have been. Go talk to Sam and Sam's dad and find out if they owned the guns in question or who owned it, because it's very clear that he didn't know. And Montana points out in the chat that she says it's actually normal for details to emerge as a person repeats their story. I would push back against that from my perspective. What's not normal is for someone to say, no, absolutely, the only gun he had was a shotgun. I'm not even sure if he owned that, but there was not a handgun. And then years later to remember the details of the first time you shot. That's not a detail emergent. That's a direct. Now, if in the first one he was like, I don't remember what guns he had. Maybe there was a handgun. And then later he's like, oh, you know what? Now I remember it. I would maybe buy that, but definitely not. No, he did not have a handgun. Yes, he had a handgun. That's not a detail emergent. That's a change in story.
Erica S. and Toby both had questions and pointed out that Chad said that he used to paintball with a guy named Austin and that he isn't sure if Robert knew Austin. Is there any chance the Austin he's mentioning is Austin Alba?
I caught the same thing and thought a huge light bulb went out. And then I went back and read the transcript and then re-listened to it. And he doesn't say, I can't remember now off the top of my head what he says, but I remember, like, I heard that and I was like, he's talking about Austin. He's talking like that's interesting. We know in Austin. And then I looked at the transcript and it wasn't even a name. I can't, and I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but he didn't actually say Austin. If you go back and listen to that part, it's a different word that he said. He doesn't say Austin.
Okay. It's not even a name. Is it like a guy from Boston or something like that? Or is it like
it's something like that? I should have, I didn't know that question was in there, or I would have, but I had the exact same thing. Like, I heard it and had the exact same reaction and then went and looked at the transcript and it said a different word. And I'm like, no, that's not what he said. Then I went back and listened. I'm like, oh yeah, that is what he said.
I mean, I listened to the episode twice. It was kind of hard to hear LeClaire's interview, but I didn't remember hearing anything about Austin. So I was wondering if maybe I didn't hear, but maybe I just heard what he did say. Sarah says, any more intel on when Chad and Becky did date and for how long and anything like that?
All I know is it was after. So Robert and Becky broke up, I think, that we've got varying times for that, but it sounds like it was, according to Robert, it was like around January, February. And then in between there, somewhere between there and when they met in July, is when Chad dated Becky. So, we know there was Chad, there was a guy named Alex, there was Gray, Jacob. Her sister said that she did date a Marine at some point or go out with a Marine. But it sounds like Chad was earlier on, before July.
Gotcha. Okay, so about the photos, a little bit about the photos. Rachel says it seemed like the boys were not shy on posting photos of themselves while shooting in the desert. Did the state try and use that 2010 photo of Robert to prove he owned a gun, even though Chad's interview states at the timestamp on the photo? Were there any other photos that were used? Other photos that were collected from around the time of the murders?
I don't think they got used at trial. I could be wrong about that, though. I'm trying to think back through the exhibits file, and when Chad was on the stand, I don't think that they asked him to put up the picture in question.
Okay,
and it's probably because it was, they knew that it was in 2010, and that's the thing. Let me be clear here. If there was evidence that Robert or Christian or both owned a 40 caliber pistol and a 12 gauge at the time of the murders, that still doesn't mean they committed, the list of people that own those guns in that area has got to be huge. Like Zach said, that's a very popular gun. The Glock 40 caliber is an extremely popular gun. And so is a 12 gauge, especially for anybody that does target shoot. Just in the little circle we know, like, you've got Chad, Sam's dad. They've been shooting with Sarah, with Jackie, with Lois. These are all people that have taken guns out to go shooting. So it doesn't mean, you've got to look at, and I'm not saying it's not good to know, but I don't want it to turn into, well, if they had the guns, that means they did it, and if they didn't have the guns, that means they didn't do it.
Right.
Because ultimately what we should be looking for is there evidence they actually committed the crime?
Right.
And as of right now, I haven't seen any, and I haven't seen Nicole get back to me on there. So I'm assuming that I'm right about that too, is I haven't seen anywhere where either of them had any access from anyone to have a handgun, which is what Vicky was shot with.
Right. I want to give a quick shout out to Lars, who wrote almost verbatim everything you just said about even if they did have access, it doesn't make them guilty. So shout out to Lars. Anybody wants to check that post out, it is almost word for word what Bob just said. For a second I was like, you must be reading Lars's post. I just want to throw out there, you guys probably saw this too, Zach, maybe you saw it, but Erica did pull up the transcript, and it does say, according to the transcript, I think I don't know if Robert and then them were with me, but I know another guy named Austin who we played football with. We went paintballing with him a couple times because he lived up there. I forgot what his last name was.
Oh, okay. That's not the part that I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
There was another part where I thought I heard Austin. That one I think I just didn't put any relevance to because it was somebody they played football with in high school, and
Yes.
Austin did not go to their school and was older than them.
Right.
So that would definitely not be
Okay.
Austin Elba.
All right. Well, that helps. Jeremy says, was the Charlie's Angels photo a printout? This seems unlikely to me. Why isn't Bodmer trying to find the metadata from a digital picture that includes the date? Maybe he's fishing for a recollection in order to avoid possible bad evidence, and then you sort of have the disappointing outcome eventually that Chad does remember that it's 2010.
Yeah. I think Bodmer I think he had printed it out, but it had to, like Chad says, he had to have gotten it from Facebook. So he could have found I think when you post on Facebook, the metadata is still there. I'm not positive about that. But Chad's very clear that, he posted it right after they did it. Because when first he finds it in like 2013, but he's like, oh, that was a repost. The original post was 2010.
Right. Janaya says, I thought the point, and here's one of the things you called out early in the episode, early in this follow-up, Bob. Janaya says, I thought a point of the state's case was finding an empty holster at Robert's house that would fit a Glock. Is this just misinformation, or was this also part of their case?
No, so this is all more of the smoke and mirrors. So yes, they found a Glock holster at Robert's house when they searched his house, but no Glock. With the holster, they found the receipt for that Glock holster that showed that he bought it in the summer, or I think it was like July of 2007, or might even been, September of 2007. So he had a holster and no gun, and they know that he bought that shortly before the search happened. And the explanation for that you'll hear on Sunday, the reason that he bought it. So I'm not gonna, I'll wait and let you guys hear it then, but Robert explains very clearly why he owns the holster and why he had bought it, even though he didn't have a gun. Also, he explains why, why he doesn't have a gun, which is exactly what I said, because he's not 21, so he can't buy one. He's actually trying to. You'll hear on Sunday. He explains it all.
Okay. Yeah, Allison was wondering, and Wes also, they asked about Christian's family. So it was also pointed out in the Facebook follow-up that, if Christian was the one driving, and if their point of origin was at his house, that would be good to know. But we've already talked about that. But shout out to you guys. And then we're just we're sort of getting away from the Glock talk in this particular episode and into some more general kind of theory and questions. Do you have more gun stuff that we didn't touch on? I know we hit Jania's point about that holster that you just mentioned. Is there more that you wanted to cover that is specific to this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there was the stuff about the search, but we're going to get into more of that coming up. Nicole did just pop back into the chat and say she double checked and said Christian's dad did own a handgun and a shotgun. Nicole, either if you can very quickly point out here in the chat. Otherwise, Nicole is the one that believes Robert and Christian are guilty, and I think she's going to be the one that's going to come on and discuss that with me on the podcast. So we've been emailing.
Cool.
So Nicole, if it's something you can real quick pop in there with details like what kind of gun, when he bought it, stuff like that, go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll talk about it right now. Otherwise,
was that used in trial?
I don't think so.
I don't know why they wouldn't use. I mean, no shade, but I don't know why. I mean, Christian's the one whose DNA they have. I feel like they would have been all over calling any attention they possibly could to Christian's dad having access or having or owning.
The only thing I
could have helped them.
Yeah, the only thing I remembered was that his dad, I think, owned a shotgun, which I believe is the shotgun that they found at Christian's house a year later that he had. But anyway, Nicole, if that information is easy to just pop in there. Otherwise, shoot me an email and just let me know the Bates number and stuff, and I can go look that up and make sure that we get that information out clearly and accurately to everyone.
Awesome. Sounds good. Okay. So Natasha says, probably not relevant to this episode, but will you be getting Jim Clemente back for a revised profile now that you have more information before the end of the season? Obviously, we talked about Jim and the live event that we did and his perception being more kind of clarified by having more information by the time we did that show, has more been kind of illuminated? And do you feel like it makes sense to have him come back in and participate in some way?
I don't think so. I mean, I talk to Jim pretty regularly, so I may mention it to him. But the things that we've been discussing since then are all suspect based, and he doesn't deal in suspect based stuff. So we had learned more about the crime scene and the neighbors and the fire and the timing of the two fires and stuff like that. That's crime scene stuff, and that's what feeds into his profile. And that's when he had learned all that, and he said that this appears to be, in his opinion, was a double homicide and a witness killed, Becky being the witness, and then also followed up with if Becky had been the target of this attack, she wouldn't have been found outside the house. She would have been found inside the house. Since then, we've been focused on suspects, so I don't know that there's anything to bring him back in on.
Okay. And that's sort of in keeping with that. Toby had said, Jim had mentioned one scenario that Jim had mentioned that we hadn't given much attention to, as a possibility that Becky was the focus of crime, but not the target, i.e. the killers wanted to punish, hurt, or scare Becky, but not kill her. But then she interrupted the crime and they had to change their plan. The recent mention that she might have been more involved in the drug scene than we thought brought this possibility back up for me. Bob, what do you think? Do you see anything in the crime scene that makes you think this scenario is likely or unlikely?
I mean, I don't really, but also in that scenario where they're maybe the plan is to kill John and Vicky to punish Becky. In that scenario, it could look exactly the same, right? So if that was the case, Becky would be a surprise. She wasn't intended to be the target. So whether or not the intention was to kill John and Vicky and Becky just happened to be there or happened to show up and surprise them and had to be killed, or if they were going after John and Vicky to punish Becky and she showed up and surprised them and they killed her. Either way, I think that the elements that we see on the crime scene would look the same.
Got it. And then Susan, this is my last one. I just wanted to shout out Susan, who put in this particular follow-up post. If we pursued the theory that this crime was related to John and or Vicky rather than Becky, is there any information at all in the file that might provide some clues or direction? And just shout out to you, Susan. I think you mentioned this, Bob, a little bit last week, that yes, we were taking a course of action that includes investigating the investigation and then seeing what we have to work with beyond the trial, beyond all of that. And that, unless I'm mistaken, you sort of felt like you're not ready to say yet whether we have enough or not enough to talk about what we're going to explore until we get there. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, I mean, we've got some information that is worth digging into about some alternate suspects and things like that. And then, as is kind of our process, when we start doing that, it's, there's a handful of episodes that I want to put out about that stuff and get this information out there. And then it's a matter of, does it start a trail of breadcrumbs to get us where we need to be? Or are we going to put it out there and it doesn't go anywhere? And then we're going to be waiting on DNA testing. So I just don't know yet.
Yeah. And shout out to Montana, who mentions, I don't know that we've really actually found out that she was more involved in any kind of drug scene than was originally thought. So
yeah, I think the only thing that we heard
good point.
different was, and Montana mentions it there, is that that she was trying to grow her own weed and stuff. And the way Montana puts it in the chat is that's hardly being involved in the drug scene. It depends on your perspective. I mean, it just depends. I mean, you're dealing with a substance that was illegal at the time and that was expensive and that people get killed over. So it's a possibility. I haven't seen any evidence that she was mixed up. I agree with Montana here that, growing a couple plants for herself and her friends is not the same as being connected to a drug cartel,
Right.
So we have no evidence of anything like that.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have. You've given us some breadcrumbs about what we can expect from next week, but we still don't have a full picture. Do you want to give us any more of a breakdown on that?
Yeah. So in doing further research and follow up on the episode about the Glock, of course, I was going through this week. I was starting just to prep for the follow up, the search of the house, the different guns, the interviews that happened after that search occurred. And I started listening to, so I had an audio version of Robert's interview after the search happened, and the audio was absolutely horrendous. Some of the worst that we've heard. So almost unlistenable. But then I also had a video of that interview, and the audio on the video is actually very good and very clean.
Nice.
So I ripped the audio out of that video, and as I was listening to it, I just think there's too much there not to put this out for you guys to hear, because so this is a year after the crime, after the search, all the stuff that we've now learned about, like the stuff they found in his house, and we've learned about like what was testified to at trial. You get LeClaire sitting down with Robert again, asking him again about their route, what they were doing, what they were driving, asking him about the guns, asking him about the business card, things like that. And it's not something to, like, you have to hear it, because there's a lot that for me was really interesting to hear, like everything from like Robert's tone and how he reacted to things when he was asked about stuff, rather than just reading it on paper. So this week I was going to get into closing arguments, but I think it's important for you guys to hear this interview. At the end of the interview, they had Christian in another room being interviewed. They brought Christian in, and the two of them they don't know they're being recorded, but they just, they pop them in the interview room together where they can chit chat a little bit. So you hear some of that. There's a really interesting exchange about the wheelbarrow. And again, it's one that if you just read it, it doesn't say much, but if you hear it, where Robert is telling Christian about they're asking me about if I touched a wheelbarrow, and you hear Christian just in the transcript, it would just say wheelbarrow, but when you're hearing it, you hear Christian saying a wheelbarrow, what? Like just completely confused about why they were talking about a wheelbarrow. But anyway, so that's what's coming up. This is, and I know a lot of you guys don't like the interviews, but you should absolutely definitely listen to this one. Again, the audio is crisp and clean. It's easy to hear, and there is a ton of information that comes out in this interview. And real quick, thank you, Nicole. Nicole just popped in, who was talking about Christian's dad. She said in Christian's first interview, his dad is there as well, and the dad says that he owns a Ruger Mini 14, a Winchester Defender pump, which I believe is the one that he has, which is a 12-gauge shotgun, and a 45 automatic, which she says he kept in his car, and a Ruger 25 and a Ruger 22. So thank you very much, Nicole, for that. So that's in Christian's first interview, if you want to go back and check the transcript or listen to that to see all that stuff. But what's important about that is that Vicky was shot with a 40 caliber or a 10 millimeter gun, and Christian's dad did not own a 40 caliber or a 10 millimeter. A 45 is nowhere close to a 40. It's a huge round.
Right.
None of those are close.
Okay.
Yeah, none of those rounds are anywhere close to that. So also, that a big point for that, I'm glad she brought that up, is according to what she's saying, and I'll have to confirm that. I have to go back and read the interview, but I trust Nicole that she's being accurate here, that apparently there was a pistol in the car that they were driving that was a 45 caliber. John and Vicky were shot with a 40 caliber. So if you're in the camp that thinks that Robert and Christian are guilty, now, if that's accurate, what we know is they absolutely had access to a gun that would have been right there, and that's not what was used.
Huh.
So that would mean that they somehow got a 40 caliber that we have no idea where it came from or how they got access to it, and they had another handgun right there that wasn't used.
Wow.
So something to think about. But thank you for that information, Nicole.
Yeah, great.
And with that, I think that we're all good. We managed to get through the storm.
I know.
Our internet hasn't cut out. I'm kind of curious to get out of the studio and see what's going on outside, see if it's as bad as they said.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for those of you who are battling that bad weather in the last couple of weeks and ongoing, we're thinking about you. We hope for the best and hope you and yours are well and safe.
Yep. Thanks everybody for listening. Zach, Janet, thank you guys. And YouTube, as always, thank you very much for all of your participation, particularly Nicole for doing research for us while we were scooting along.
Yeah, and, awesome.
We'll talk to you guys again next week.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, let's stop on our audio.
Sorry, I forget to hold the note at the end.
Yeah.